Taoiseach, I don't know whether you read an article in the News Review on Saturday in the Irish Times by Kitty Holland, which I think laid bare an appalling and shameful scandal in present-day Ireland in relation to the number of homeless children in Ireland, and particularly in Dublin, in the capital city. Tonight, Taoiseach, essentially 700 children will be sleeping in hostels, hotel rooms, or other forms of emergency accommodation. These children are not in their own bedrooms, not in what they could call their own homes or their own communities. And there's only one reason for it. Their parents cannot pay the rent. And it's a countrywide problem, but there's about 118 families outside of Dublin in this situation. But in Dublin, it's been particularly acute over the last 18 months in particular. For example, in May 2013, Taoiseach, there were about 58 adults with children who were in emergency accommodation, B&Bs and hotel rooms and so on. You move fast forward to November of last year, within months that had doubled to 128 adults with children. You go to May 2014, that's up again to 184 adults with children. And you go to October of this year, and you're looking at 421 adults with about 700 children in emergency accommodation. Now, Taoiseach, by any standards, that is shameful, particularly if we're meant to be cherishing all the children of the nation equally. And the fundamental issue in an emergency and crisis response sense is the rent allowance caps that were brought in by the Taoiseach and which have exacerbated the situation beyond belief. Essentially, if you're on rent allowance, you can only pay a certain amount of rent. There's a cap on it, and it has proved catastrophic in terms of the families concerned, because these are low-income families. The vast majority of them have never experienced homelessness before in their lives. The anxiety, the stress and trauma caused to the parents is enormous, and to the children themselves. As a 5-year-old said, who was interviewed and quoted, "I can't draw my house. I don't remember what it looks like. At weekends, I don't have friends to play." The question I want to put to you, Taoiseach, do you accept that this is a crisis? And do you accept, Taoiseach, that it demands an emergency and crisis response? And essentially, will you immediately raise the rent allowance caps as an emergency measure to facilitate people on low incomes to meet the spiralling rents that have increased dramatically over the last 12 months, particularly in the city of Dublin?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, Deputy Martin is aware of the situation where children in particular are homeless is not one that anybody can condone. You're aware that there's a protocol in existence dealing with focus point and threshold, and the Department of Health, which has, I think, which has dealt with about 150 cases to date, which I think has improved the situation for them. And the movement here is towards a case-by-case management situation. Obviously, there are reasons why children end up homeless or families end up homeless, and obviously part of that has been the increases in rent, where landlords have removed families from accommodation for higher rents. That's reflected actually in the government's response here by the allocation of 2.2 billion for social housing, together with the monies allocated for improvement of 1,800 void dwellings here in Dublin, which now are being, in the course of being reconstructed, renovated and made fit for families and for allocation. And the city manager reports progress to the Cabinet Subcommittee on a monthly basis so that families can be housed. Nobody wants to see this, and I think everybody's aware that following the complete collapse of the construction sector, that the requirement and the demand for housing is now at an all-time premium, particularly in Dublin. I would expect that the Construction 2020 proposition put forward by the government and being followed through by Minister Kelly and Minister Coffey will result by 2020 in having the social housing demand eliminated, with the allocation of almost 2.2 billion euro, which is unprecedented in the context of the scale of providing facilities to build houses for families. Clearly there's an emergency here for many of these cases, and nobody wants to see a family out on the street, much less children on the street. But the protocol that is in place, Deputy Martin, is actually working in respect of families and home.
Please.
Go and ask those who've been helped by it, so, Deputy McGrath. And that's moved now to a case-by-case management system. It's not, it cannot deal with all of the cases immediately, obviously, but it is one that is a priority for the Minister and for the Government, and the resources are being made available to deal with that in the best way possible. But until you get to a point where you actually provide sufficient social housing, you cannot lessen the scale of demand here, and that requires flexibility in planning permission, the availability of resources which are being put into it, but also competent contractors to get down to business and start providing homes and houses for people who clearly have a demand for it and have had that demand for quite a number of years. And the rent situation is one that has already been addressed by the Minister.
Taoiseach.
Deputy Martin, thank you. Deputy.
Taoiseach, you didn't get the point I was making.
Deputy, would you please?
Taoiseach, to a certain extent, Taoiseach, the government is sleepwalking through the crisis.
Yes.
Focus Ireland last year we're seeing about 8 a month families going homeless. This year it's 50 a month. That's just Focus Ireland alone. You refer to a pilot scheme that they've initiated. This cannot be solved on a case-by-case basis. It has to be a system-wide response. And the most effective emergency response is to raise the rent caps, Taoiseach. People are limited and restricted in what they can pay at the moment if they're in receipt of rent allowance. And basically, it's completely out of kilter with what the market is demanding in terms of rents. As a result, thousands of low-income families across the country cannot get access to private rented accommodation because of that. Will you please face up to that? Accept that it was a catastrophic change that was made and something needs to happen, and what has to happen is the rent allowance caps have to be raised immediately. You have to look at rent controls if that's an issue, but clearly the rent allowance caps is something that would make an immediate difference, because the 700 children tonight, Taoiseach, who are sleeping in hotel rooms or in other forms of B&Bs and so on like that, and emergency accommodation, they cannot wait until 2020 to have this problem solved. You know, as one person said, you know, she doesn't want, one child said, I don't want to be there for Christmas. That's back to the hotel room she's going to. I don't feel like we're going home because it's just a room. And there's many more quotes.
Thank you.
You know, Taoiseach, to a certain extent, every government should have certain key priorities. Now, you took your own priorities in the budget, and you made your decisions on that. And it looked after people in far better conditions than the people who were dealt with by the appalling homelessness scandal that we're witnessing at the moment. But it is within your power, Taoiseach, to do something about it, and it's within the Taoiseach's power. And I would urge you to change tack and increase the rental allowance.
Well, I have to say to you that Focus Ireland and Threshold have expressed themselves satisfied with the way that the protocol is actually working, and as I pointed out to you, they've dealt with 150 cases. You're also aware, Deputy Martin, that there are 73,000 families in receipt of the rental allowance, and that's at a cost of 315 million, and that allows for movement through that protocol to a more satisfactory solution for themselves. And as I said, the largest ever allocation for social and affordable housing has been made available by the government of 2.2 billion. Obviously, you've got to get competent contractors on the ground to build this. In addition to that, I've already mentioned the allocation for the improvement and the renovation and renewal of voided dwellings here in Dublin, which is currently underway and which I'm assured from the City Council will be allocated on a very expeditious basis so that families won't have to wait like they had previously for 9 or 10 months after a place was renovated or brought to a state where it is absolutely fit for people to live in comfortably and all of that. So the government are very well aware of the scale of this. The Supreme Court made a ruling, as you're aware, in respect of rent controls, and obviously you have to take account. They made a ruling in respect of rent control, and obviously with low-income families here, the priority is to provide social and affordable housing for them, and that's why the largest ever allocation was actually put in place.
Thank you.